Okej. Så en av man kan säga att den här föreläsningen baserar sig i väldigt hög utsträckning på tankar, funderingar jag haft både som doktorand i filosofi men också som kritiker här och i samtal och i andra uppdrag som har haft att göra med personer som jobbar med reklam, med design och på olika sätt med kreativa processer. Och det slog mig att även om på ett ytligt plan så verkar det väldigt olika det man gör som en filosof och som en reklamare och som en författare och som en arkitekt, så tycks det finnas väldigt många likheter. Och jag uppfattar att och den här föreläsningen kommer liksom försöka sätta fingret på de här likheterna. Försöker sätta fingret på det som förenar idéskapande verksamhet. Och idéskapande verksamhet, ja, det är sådana saker som ni förhoppningsvis kommer göra. Det är sånt som författare ägnar sig åt, konstnärer, arkitekter, alla som vetenskapsmän, alla som ägnar sig åt en verksamhet där du som verksam förväntas ha en ny idé, ha en idé om hur man löser ett problem. Ni kan själva föreställa er, man kan ge jättemånga exempel. Men låt oss då börja med, som vi filosofer gillar att börja med, en fråga om definitioner. Okej, men vad är en idé egentligen? Jag kommer förstås, egentligen hela den här föreläsningen kommer på sätt och vis handla om att försöka svara på den här idén. Men vi kommer närma oss den på lite olika sätt. Man kan säga att, eller ur mitt perspektiv, så handlar en idé om ett sätt att lösa ett problem på. Jag ska prata mer om vad jag menar med problem och jag ska prata mer om vad jag menar med att lösa. Och ett problem här behöver inte vara någonting negativt. Alltså ofta brukar man säga jag har ett problem med min bil. Då menar man att bilen har gått sönder på något sätt. Eller riskerar att gå sönder. Men jag menar problem i en väldigt bred bemärkelse. Ett problem här kan vara ett filosofiskt problem. Som till exempel, vad innebär det att universum är oändligt stort? Det kan också vara ett praktiskt problem. Hur förmedlar vi att den här produkten är väldigt bra? Eller hur skapar vi ett hus som är hållbart till exempel? Eller som minskar konsumtionen av vatten eller någonting sånt. Så problem kan vara väldigt praktiska, de kan vara väldigt abstrakta och teoretiska. Ett annat problem kan vara liksom, hur uppstod arterna till exempel? Det kan vara en väldigt generell fråga. Så idéer handlar dels om problem i den här väldigt breda bemärkelsen. Och jag sa också att idéer handlar om att lösa problem. Och det här måste också tolkas väldigt brett. Därför att med lösa så menar jag inte nödvändigtvis att svara på problemet på ett direkt sätt. Man säger, jo men så här är universum oändligt stort. Så här kan vi förklara det matematiskt. Man kan lösa problem genom att bryta upp problem i mindre beståndsdelar. Och förhoppningsvis, om de här beståndsdelarna är enklare att utforska eller förstå eller få grepp om. Jag kan skriva här. Lösning. Det kan vara att bryta upp. Det kan också vara att omdefiniera problem. Till exempel, vi inom filosofi brukar ofta, ett problem vi ofta diskuterar, det är fria viljans problem. Som ett jättesvårt problem. Hur kan det vara så att människor har en fri vilja? Vi har en jättestark upplevelse av att vi är fria. Men den här upplevelsen tycks inte passa in i våra bästa vetenskapliga teorier om världen. Så det här är ett jättesvårt filosofiskt problem. Och ett sätt att försöka lösa ett problem på, det är att omdefiniera det. Säga, okej, men det kanske inte är fri vilja vi ska prata om. Utan vi kanske ska prata om moraliskt ansvar. Hur kan det vara så att vi är moraliskt ansvariga? På det sättet så kan man kanske lösa ett problem som var, det omdefinierade problemet som förhoppningsvis inte är lika svårt. Ibland kan det förstås handla om att formulera nya problem. Och det här gör ju filosofer väldigt gärna. Men det gör man inte bara därför att det är roligt. Ja, men ibland gör man väl det. Men ofta så skapar man nya problem eller liksom försöker identifiera nya problem. Därför att man uppfattar att man kan kanske svara på de existerande problemen på ett enklare sätt. Oj, nu gick den på bara helt plötsligt. Kan du se om du kan stänga av den? Det som står där vid projektorn. Ja. Ja, men vänta, förlåt. Jag kunde göra det här. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I wasn't told that it was going to be in English. Of course I can speak in English. Okay, no, but I can change language. There's no problem at all. So where was I? Yeah. Making new problems can assist us in solving previous problems. So just as when we realized that the problem of cancer was not a unified problem, so cancer is not a disease. Rather, cancer seems to be a lot of different diseases. So in a sense, we've been finding new problems. But in fact, we've had gaining a more detailed, nuanced understanding of the problem of cancer. So creating problems. Creating or finding problems, depending on how you view it. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is that an idea is not just something that exists. It's not just a crazy thought or some random impression that you have. Rather, it's something quite specific. It's something that is about something and something that tries to address something. So it's, so to speak, in a general discourse or discussion about idea making, you have this view that ideas are somehow, could be about anything or are just, free-floating things that just happen to you. No. What I'm trying to say here from my experience and from what I've read is that no, ideas are quite specific and they're about the world in this sense. And since ideas are about the world and ideas have specific purposes, we can also assess the value of an idea with regards to this purpose. So now, this might sound a bit fascist to you, saying that there are good and bad ideas, or that an idea can be better than another one. So because being good or being worse than or better than are value judgments, right? So we often tend to think that value judgments cannot be true or false, or they just express my subjective opinion, or they're just good in a certain context. Well, I would like to say that ideas can be good or bad because they have a purpose. If we identify the purpose, or given the purpose of the idea, we can also identify when and to what degree and why an idea is good. So, let me give you an analogy. A violin is a good instrument if it's good at producing the sounds and tones that a violin is supposed to create. Right? So you can assess the quality of a violin with regards to this, to the ability of the violin to produce the sounds when a human plays it. What I would like to say is that we can assess the value of an idea with regards to the purposes of the idea. Let's see here. I'm going to. Is there any? There's no water to wet this. Okay. Okay. So ideas have a purpose and can be assessed with regards to that purpose, to it. Okay. So what makes an idea good then? Well, any idea is an attempt to solve a problem. Then it is not, it should not surprise us that an idea is good to the degree that it is relevant for that problem. So for example, if you want to know how to open a tin can, I could provide you with a comprehensive history of the tin can and how it affected the world politics and warfare in the age of Napoleon and how people have thought about tin cans throughout the ages. So you could say that my lecture on tin cans somehow relates to your problem, how to open this goddamn tin can. But you could say that with regards to solving this particular problem, it is not relevant. And in that sense, an idea must be relevant. And by relevance, what I'm trying to say is that it has to, in some sense, help us address the problem at hand. So an idea doesn't need to solve the problem, because that would be, I mean, there are a lot of really good ideas that don't solve the problems directly, that don't give us an answer to how come a species emerge. But a good idea can help us make a little progress in solving the relevant problems. The second notion here that I would like to point to, and it's also contrary, I believe, to some cultural stereotypes about ideas, is that ideas need to exist in a dialogue. By the way, before most of you came, I said that hopefully I'm going to say controversial stuff that will provoke you in a sense, and I encourage you to ask questions and to be provoked and to challenge the things that I'm saying here. I'll get to why that is important, because that is also important in the production of ideas. Please, sir, can you close the door behind you? So what do I mean that the world, that ideas need to be in dialogue with the world? Well, there's this notion that people who have ideas, they tend to just sit in their chambers and think. That's at least the stereotype of the philosopher. You're sitting in a bathtub, you're sitting in a sofa, you're always sitting or lying. And then all of a sudden you say like, Eureka! And then you have this great idea and then you change the world. Well, I would say that nothing could be farther from the truth. Ideas are not produced in isolation. Ideas are not produced by lonely people who don't talk to others. People with ideas have often, or I would say always, been in direct dialogue with others, have been taking in the ideas of others, discussing them, and replying to them. Ideas don't emerge in a vacuum. They always emerge in an ecosystem. Ideas are a reaction to some problem that is perceived, or to the failure to perceive a problem. So if you take Isaac Newton, his idea that the motion of the heavenly bodies was governed by the same force that makes things fall on Earth, was motivated by the lack of mathematical models to describe the motion of these bodies. Because before Newton, or actually before Kepler, it was thought that the heavenly bodies move in perfect circles. And then everyone was happy, okay, because perfect circles, circle is the perfect shape, we don't need to explain anymore. I mean, why do they move in circles? Well, of course they're going to move in circles. Plato told us that circles are the perfect shape, so why not? And then Kepler came and saw like, hey, they don't move in circles, they actually move in ellipses, right? Like this. Well, slightly exaggerated. And then everyone was really upset because ellipses are not perfect. They're not a nice shape according in the Platonic idea or scheme of things. So a scientific explanation had to emerge to explain this weird fact about the universe. Newton answered to that fact. Sometimes Einstein is described as this kind of lone genius sitting in his patent office, not paying attention to anything outside of it, and writing his theories in marvelous isolation. Well, this is also false. Einstein was very much in dialogue with other physicists in Europe, in the world. Sure, he was working at a patent office, but that didn't mean that he didn't read or write or discuss, and we can see this from his letters. And often people who are, so to speak, eccentrics, people who are a bit crazy, tend to appeal to this idea that innovative and creative people are somehow hermits that sit in their little caves and come up with this brilliant stuff. Just because they are, so it's like a way to explain why they are really geniuses when nobody thinks that. But this is actually not the case. Finally, I think that as a criterion, as a working criterion for a good idea, and I mean this as a very practical guide to you, by the way. I'm not saying, I am a philosopher, but I'm in the branch of philosophy called practical philosophy. Well, it hasn't so much to do with practice, even though I believe that this lecture is a practical lecture. So I hope that these ideas or that these suggestions might be of help to you when you are formulating your ideas in your studies and your work. The third is not obviously false. With emphasis on obviously. Because most good ideas are in fact false. And most of your best ideas that you will have in your life will turn out to be false. Will turn out to be not as helpful as you thought at addressing the problem. So I think this is a very, very crucial fact about ideas. Almost all ideas are false in the sense that they have a crucial flaw that makes them impossible to realize. But that doesn't mean they're good, they're bad. Because being right is really, really difficult. I don't think I've ever been right. I don't know. That sounds a bit contradicting. No, but honestly, being right about the world is something that rarely happens to us. We only have access to a very limited frame of reference, to a very limited perspective. And from that perspective, we can hope to produce good ideas and hopes that sometimes these ideas will also be true. But ideas can be very, very good, even when they're false, if they motivate us to explore the world further. Or maybe they teach us something important about the world, even though they turn out to be false. Let me give you an example. Well, I've already mentioned Newton. So Newton's theory was not true in the deep sense of true. It was not true because it didn't account for special relativity. Newton had an idea about space as a room. In Newton's idea, space was like this room, just a very big room, and distance between objects could be measured as absolute distances. This turned out to be false. Yet, Newton's theory has been one of the most important and revolutionizing ideas ever formulated. It helped us solve a lot of practical problems. With Newton, we could calculate ballistics. You can send a rocket to the moon with just using Newton's idea. So this is perhaps the best false idea that I know of. But there are many really good false ideas. And we can go back to Aristotle, who only had false ideas. I mean, I don't think Aristotle is right about anything. Maybe his theory about learning is fairly close to reality. But Aristotle was wrong about almost everything. Yet I think everyone agrees that Aristotle, his contribution to science and to the knowledge of mankind is without its it's unique, and it's not because his ideas were true. It's because his ideas were false in an interesting sense. And this is, I think, something that you could think about. Okay, this idea might be false, but maybe it's interesting. Maybe it's false in an interesting sense. And it's interesting if it's in dialogue with the world and if it's relevant to the problem we address. But I'm writing here obviously false, because some ideas are obviously false, and then they're not going to be very helpful. If I formulate a theory which is contradictory, obviously contradictory, then that is not going to be helpful. If you devise a communication strategy that is obviously false, that is obviously not going to work, like we can communicate that this candy is really good by showing pictures of it in a pile of shit, or something like that, it's not going to work. And it's not going to be interesting, false in the interesting sense. The same goes for art. I mean, if you have an artist whose art project consists in grilling infants in a microwave, then this artist is not controversial. He's just a criminal, or he or she is just a criminal, right? There's nothing interesting about grilling babies in a microwave. It's just plain awful. And then you might ask yourself, okay, but how do I know that something is obviously wrong and not just wrong, you know? Well, can be difficult to tell. It's not easy to devise an obvious method of finding out. But if you just formulate the idea and tell it to a friend, and your friend says, this sounds crazy, or this is never gonna work, then this might be a good indication that this is an idea that qualifies as obviously wrong. an idea should be clear and consequent, consistent. Excuse my academic Swinglish. In English, in Swedish you would say det ska vara konsekvent. In English you say that it should be consistent. And by consistent, I don't mean, because we already said that it should not be contradictory. It's not like you want to build a gun that both kills your opponent and that heals your opponent. That would be just a weird project. But by saying consistent is that it should be systematic in a sense. It should be as simple and clear as possible given the context of the problem. So let me give you an example from arts. A book that is about everything is a book that is not really worth reading. All great books have a certain theme, a certain concept, or a certain idea, or a certain theory about the world that they wish to convey. War and Peace, well, it wants to convey the horrors of war and how families splinter and the human tragedy of war. Crime and Punishment wants to tell us about how guilt can crush a person and how punishment is a redemption for sin. So the greatest ideas are fairly simple in a sense. And I'm not saying that Crime and Punishment is a simple book. In fact, it's a very subtle book. It's a very subtle investigation of human psychology and what it means to feel guilt and to feel how your acts were so wrong. So clear doesn't mean simple necessarily, or simple in a kind of well. So do you understand what I mean? You could say if we would be building a house, say, and you have an idea about what this house should be about, then of course when you formulate an idea, you know that sooner or later this idea needs to confront reality. And reality is always complex and messy, and people have different ideas about or different preferences, and the politicians might want to say that no, we want to build this other thing, and so on. But I believe that an idea here, when it's formulated, should be as clear and consistent and simple and true to its origins as possible. So if we want to build a house that perhaps wants to express transparency, then you can build a house that looks like Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon. Which is it's a fantastic building that was designed by a philosopher. And what he wanted was that he wanted a new kind of prison. In Bentham's age, prisons were like dungeons. So you were just put in a dungeon, and sometimes they were like refugee camps, so to speak. So you could have your whole family there, and there was just a lot of crime going on in the prisons and so on. But what Bentham envisioned was a prison where the prisoner would always be seen, would always be visible to the prison guard or to the authorities that controlled the prisoner. And Panopticon is a building, and you can Google it if you want in the break or now if you want. Panopticon is, in a sense, a very systematic and clear implementation of this idea. Because Bentham believed that crime and immorality thrives in darkness. When we believe that we are not seen, when we believe that we are in private, then the need or the urge to commit crime and sin increase. Because we are not judged in the eyes of others. But Bentham thought that if you build a prison where the prisoners are always seen from the outside by others, then that would make them more moral. Well, I don't know. Maybe he's right or wrong with regards to his theory, psychological theory. But regardless, I think that this building is quite a remarkable piece of architecture and philosophy in once, and art, because of its consistency. Finally, I would say that there's like no particular order of importance here, but an idea must be original. And I also want to say something about this word original, because of course it doesn't need to be original in the sense that nobody else thought about it. Because how could you know that? It's not necessarily the case that it needs to be original in the sense that nobody has done this. So when I say original, it needs to be original in a specific context. Many of the best ideas have taken one concept or one solution to a problem and applied it to another problem. Or combined two solutions to create a new solution to a specific problem. So by original, I don't mean necessarily completely new. Or perhaps there is an idea that is just out there, and what you do is that you implement it. That would also, I think, qualify as original. Because the implementation in itself is part of the idea. Remember, ideas are about the world. They have a purpose to solve problems. An idea that hasn't solved a problem or hasn't been used to solve a problem, it's just out there. It's not really an idea that is there, so to speak. It's not an idea that has been used. So by originality, I mean this. But of course, I mean, if we would do the exact same thing as someone else already did, then that would not be as interesting as it is if it was new. I mean, if I would write an exact copy of Crime and Punishment, then nobody would think that I'm a genius. Maybe you would think that I am very patient if I write it by hand. Or if I would invent the iPhone, you might think that I'm very skilled at programming or something like that to create an exact copy. But you wouldn't say that I'm innovative. Okay, so do you have any thoughts about this? Any ideas? Tell me a bit about what, because I read on the webpage for your course description, but I didn't really understand what you were, doing from the course description. Can you just give me a hint? Yeah?
A concept, an idea that somehow solves a certain problem relating to the relationship between working and living in Stockholm in 2051.
That is your program.
Did you mean our
Sub-project.
Your project?
I mean just this course or the
This
entire
course.
program?
Ah, okay. No, well, yes, both. So your project now is to solve, how did you say, formulate it?
Formulate a concept that can hopefully simplify the relationship between
That's great. That's a very nice problem. It's a huge problem, and the good thing is that it's fairly easy to conceive of how you could break it down into smaller problems, and also you can take those smaller problems and break them down further. So I hope that this kind of has given you some idea about how to start thinking about these things. And I don't suggest that you need to agree with everything. And especially as you are students, I think that this originality aspect of ideas maybe is not as important. I mean, you're just learning how to do this. Then perhaps it's not crucial that your ideas are original. So perhaps this is, not to prioritize. But I do think that these other parts are very important. And in particular, I believe that, well, from my experience working with students with ideas, both as a tutor but also as a critic, is that ideas, well, students are not always very aware about the problem they're solving or how their ideas relate to the problem that they're solving. So that's one idea that I would urge you to think about more closely. How is my solution making the problem better or helping us understand the problem better? And then there's this consistency part. Because there's this urge, I think, and I would say this goes for myself as well. I mean, I was also a student once, I'm still a student in a sense, to include everything in your idea. So you happen to really like bicycles, and you really happen to like parks, and you happen to like, I don't know, social equality. So you want to create an idea or a concept that will combine all these three things that you really like. And it turns out that, it's kind of haphazard. It doesn't really address any of these problems as good as it could if you would remove some of these aspects from your concept. So I would encourage you that, as Ingmar Bergman said, or maybe, well, I don't know, it was some Swedish guy, said like, kill your darlings. And by that he meant, don't try to put everything you like in your concept. Don't try to solve all the problems you've been thinking about. Focus on one problem or a few problems and see if you can make something interesting about that. Because you have plenty of time. You will have plenty of time in the rest of your life to work with all these ideas. You don't have to do it right now. Yeah?
Just a quick question about originality. There are lots of, I would argue, good ideas out there that perhaps are not hugely original in the big sense, but what they do take is an existing idea, either from a different field or from the same field, but develops it.
Yeah.
Would that still qualify as originality?
Yeah, definitely. And I actually mentioned it. That's definitely original. Because as I said before, ideas are in dialogue with the world. And being in dialogue means, well, using whatever tools and preconceptions and concepts out there that are to be found. So an idea that tries to reinvent the wheel is not as good as it could be. Or it means wasting a lot of effort on doing something that already exists. So I think definitely that an idea that takes something out there and applies it into a new domain is definitely original. So by original, I mean something quite wide. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. I have like a little ideas checklist that I would like to suggest to you, like how to think if you have a great idea. Horrible. That was a bad idea. But now we learned something about the world. Okay, so let's imagine you have this great idea. You're really, in Swedish, taggad. Let's go. Yeah, you have a great idea. So what should you do? Well, remember here it's about dialogue. So start by reading about this. And sometimes it's really difficult to read about it because you don't have an idea where to start. So since you're students, you have an advantage. You have a teacher. And a teacher is hopefully someone who knows a little bit more about this area than you do. So you ask them, where can I read about parks? Or where can I read about bicycles or whatever? If you don't have a teacher, or if you have a teacher but he or she just gives you some kind of strange sociological tome that has many really long vowels in its title, you should always start looking with Wikipedia. Check Wikipedia, that's the best way to start. By doing this, you make sure that your problem is both relevant and in dialogue with existing ideas about the area that you're looking at. So what arguments are there against and for your idea? Are there any new arguments that you thought of but that you don't find in the literature? You revise your idea. Then you talk to your friends. Present your idea to your friends and ask them what they think about it. Ask them to be critical. Probably they're going to have some objections. Revise your idea. Check the literature again. Maybe you have some new information where to look. Check your literature again. Is your idea still relevant? Probably you have to revise it again. So revise it again. Talk to your teacher now, or someone who is an expert in the field. Tell them about your idea and ask them to be as mean as possible. Because cruelty is very important to ideas. And try to think that, of course, my idea is wrong. I mean, obviously, it's going to be wrong. Even if I would be Newton, only 1 in 100 ideas is correct. So what your teacher can do is to point out if it's obviously wrong. If your teacher doesn't think that it's obviously wrong, then you can proceed. You probably have to revise it quite a lot, though. And here it really helps to be masochistic, in a sense, to really like to inflict pain on yourself, because it is painful to receive harsh criticism. But just remember, being wrong is not something bad. It's something you should be proud of. It means that your idea is controversial and probably that it's interesting. So you should love failure and love receiving criticism. Revise your idea again, show it to your colleagues, continue revising, and try to be as public with your idea as possible. If you have a blog, write it there. If you have a Facebook, try to pitch your ideas on Facebook. If you're invited to talk about something, try to pitch your idea there, and so on and so forth. By opening to dialogue and opening yourself to criticism, you can also improve your idea further. And always revise when you receive criticism. Because nobody likes to criticize an idea where the person who is criticized doesn't react to the criticism. It's just frustrating. Think about critics as doing you a favor. You wouldn't repay a favor by not listening to those who are doing you the favor. Okay, of course, sometimes they're just stupid, the person who criticizes you, or misunderstand. Then try to explain again. If they still criticize you, then maybe you've misunderstood them. So that was my rough guide to ideas. And if you have further questions, you can email me here. But I think we're out of time. Your teacher told me that you're going to another lecture at KDH. So good luck and have fun with your ideas. Thank you.